So we need to talk about Steve Witkoff. For those of you who do not know who Steve Witkoff is, that wouldn't be surprising because Steve Witkoff, you know what, actually, maybe I shouldn't put it this way because I already don't think Steve Witkoff doesn't have enough experience. He's not somebody who is really involved in Eastern European affairs, but he's commenting on Ukraine's future quite frequently. The way he talks about the war seems quite naive, but that naivete has taken such heights that there's not a charitable bone left in my body. And we have to talk about it. We have to talk about it. So let's start here. Actually, you know what? Before, I wanted to show you what the BBC said about him, because I thought that was funny. And it just shows you the level of respect Witkoff has been able to elicit from the international security community. Here is a BBC security correspondent talking about Witkoff before we get started.
And Frank, just briefly, what are the implications of Witkoff's comments over the weekend, really criticising the Starmer peace plan, this European move towards getting more military defence in place?
I think this is going to be enormously frustrating, not just to the British government, but also to the French government, because they took the signals from Donald Trump, from the Trump administration, and assumed that it was up to Europe to sort out some kind of strong force that would not be a peacekeeping force, but a reassurance force to try and safeguard whatever ceasefire is finally agreed. So hearing these very dismissive comments by Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who is not a professional negotiator. He knows very little about foreign affairs. He's a New York property tycoon who plays golf with Donald Trump, and he doesn't even have a handle on what the 5 oblasts, the 5 provinces of Ukraine that Russia has seized. Nevertheless, he's the man of the moment. He's spearheading these talks, and he dismissed Sir Keir Starmer's efforts as being pose and posture. That won't go down well in Whitehall.
So the consensus is this is not an expert. This is not somebody who knows the region. This is not somebody who has, is a well-respected, high-profile diplomat in this arena. He is somebody who is friends with the president, who, through his loyalty, has once again, as has happened with many people in the president's cabinet, has been able to wiggle himself into a position of influence and is now wielding that influence. And the way he has wielded that influence on this issue has been particularly ignorant, if not malicious, depending on how you interpret his actions. But Witkoff is continuing to repeat Russian propaganda, and there's certain things that he says that you can only really think he believes if you truly, benefit of the doubt, think he is the most naive fool imaginable. And I'm not saying that to be mean. We'll go and get into it right now if you think that's a wild claim. And at the end, you can tell me if it's a wild claim in the comments or in emails, DylanBurnsTV@gmail.com, okay? Let's start with what happened a few days ago, which I think is one of the clearest examples of his naivete, but it only gets worse from here. It only gets worse. So this is a clip where Steve Witkoff is responding to the fact that after there was an announced ceasefire where Donald Trump pressured the Ukrainians by cutting off aid to them and intelligence support, and also, later cutting off things like assistance in trying to recover the kidnapped children from the Russians, the ones that were stolen and trafficked away. But of course, he's going up there to clean up the deep state, get rid of the trafficking, but he's not going to dedicate any resources to trafficking. Anyway, Donald Trump pushes Ukraine to ask for a ceasefire, to want a ceasefire. And they're like, okay, fine, we'll do a ceasefire. But look, the Russians have broken all these ceasefires before. That causes a huge scandal. The Ukrainians saying that. And so the Ukrainians say, fine, we'll do a ceasefire anyway. We'll agree to a across-the-board 30-day ceasefire. The Russians then say, ooh, yeah, that's fantastic. No. And then they negotiate a bit. And what Trump's able to get is instead, because the Russians want to continue the war on the front line, is a ceasefire, according to Trump, across energy infrastructure and civilian infrastructure. That's what the White House announced. And I'm going to use that as the terms of the ceasefire because that's what they said. And we're supposed to take the president at his word. Anyway, if we lived in a normal country. Anyway, they say that. And that is followed with the Russians saying that they also agree to a ceasefire. They announced it's just an energy ceasefire. So they did not agree to a civilian ceasefire from their perspective, or at least they have yet to announce it so. But Trump said so, and the Ukrainians said so as well, because the Americans went to the Ukrainians and said the civilian infrastructure is included. But hours after all this happened, the Russians fired and bombed Ukraine's energy infrastructure in Donetsk. Hours after it was signed. Now, this is not the only instances that happened. This also happened in Odessa, and now there's also been strikes on civilian infrastructure as well. So whether you go by the terms of Trump's original, the ceasefire that he wanted across the board, whether you go by the terms of the ceasefire that Trump said that he got, which was civilian and energy, or even if you just go by the announced version of the Russian ceasefire where they're trying to get away with as much as possible, and you just cover energy infrastructure, and every single variation, they violated the ceasefire, which then led to retaliatory strikes, which probably led to more retaliatory strikes, and the ceasefire just hasn't held. It just hasn't held. Energy infrastructure has been targeted, and civilian infrastructure has been targeted. So far, when we talk about, retaining America's or regaining America's respect on the world stage, peace through strength, I do not see it holding the ceasefire together. When there's a ceasefire, fire is supposed to cease, and it has not ceased. So it's failed. Anyway, Witkoff has an explanation for this. Don't worry, guys. Witkoff has an explanation because he went and he talked to the Russians. And the Russians told him this morning, and this was 5 days ago, so this was right after some of the first violations of the ceasefire. He told him that morning, the Russians, that it was an accident. Oh my God, you fumble and you stumble and you whoopsie daisy, whoop. I just fell on this banana peel and I bombed their electrical grid. Oh, I hate when that happens. Don't you hate when that happens? I hate when that happens. My God. That used to happen to Grandpa all the time. I hate it. Well, but don't you worry, though, because the Russians also shot down their own drones. But they didn't shoot them all down, obviously, because they got through and they ended up hitting the electrical infrastructure in Donetsk and knocking out people's power in a region where the Russians are still trying to advance. Did the same thing in Odessa. So, but Witkoff says he believes them. Listen to his logic.
With regard to your question on some of the reporting with regard to the Russian drones last night, I have it on good information from a telephone call I had before I went on this show that President Putin issued an order within 10 minutes of his call with the president directing Russian forces not to be attacking any Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And any attacks that happened last night would have happened before that order was given. In fact, the Russians tell me this morning that 7 of their drones were on their way when President Putin issued his order, and they were shot down by Russian forces. So I tend to believe that President Putin is operating in good faith. He said that he was going to be operating in good faith to the president yesterday, and I take him at his word. With regard to...
So let me just throw this out there quickly, okay? Okay, he takes him at his word. Why he would take him at his word? Why that would be the espoused position of the United States government? Whether it's naivete, whether it's personal love or affection, whether it's he believes it's within their interest and he truly, like, Putin has convinced him of that, I don't know. But, I mean, there have been more strikes since this, including strikes in Odessa, which caused a massive fire when they bombed the port, injuring a bunch of teenagers. Here it is. You can see the massive fire. Power was knocked out to people in Odessa, in certain parts of Odessa. So here's my question. When there's another strike, what will the excuse be then? Will it be there was another accident? Or will it say, oh, it was retaliatory in some way? And here's the thing. This is civilian infrastructure. Civilian infrastructure has been hit. And other pieces of civilian infrastructure has been hit since this agreement has been made. So If we apply the standards of the Russian ceasefire, best terms, they violated by then, by those terms. But even if you go by Trump's terms or whoever terms, like we said, it's violated it on every instance. But even if you give the Russians a timeout and say, fine, you violated it on the first day, and but that's okay. They've still violated it by the terms of the White House agreement through strikes on civilian infrastructure. So to me, this comes off as incredibly naive. Because this would, I mean, when I go back over there in a month, am I going to be hearing about how they're totally done on these civilian strikes now? I'm going to look out my window and see a drone hit an apartment block next to me. Is that what I'm going to see? Well, let's move on to some deeper naivete. This is from Russia Today, RT, Russian state television, where they were reposting tons and tons of clips from Tucker Carlson's interview with Steve Witkoff. Now, you guys might know Tucker Carlson as the liar who talks about the news and makes up fantasies about it. For example, when he accused the Ukrainians of taking American weapons and then smuggling them back to the Mexican cartels, which was a conspiracy theory that Vivek Ramaswamy, he fell for it a year and a half ago, and he was so embarrassed by it, by the fact that he was caught peddling that nonsense, that he wiped it off social media. But here is Tucker Carlson a year and a half later eating those rat droppings. He lied about death statistics on Fox News, flipping the death data from leaked government reports. He's lied about Barack Obama having gay crack affairs. He at least treated it as if it was credible, while trying to treat himself as if he was credible, which is silly on its face. Anyway, he had Steve Witkoff on because Tucker Carlson, even though we're supposed to live in a civilized society, somehow has some amount of influence and can speak to people of power and influence. And so he, the person who constantly lies about the war in Ukraine, is now getting to interview Steve Witkoff instead of, say, I don't know, a Ukrainian journalist or somebody with expertise in the region. No, they have their own media circles. They have their own environment. They can put Steve Witkoff in that bubble if they need to. And so that's what they've done. They put him on this show so they can get interviews like this. Now, listen to this. Why do you think Russia Today would take this and repost it and be proud of it? Why would Russian state TV love this foot job under the table towards Putin? And that's a graphic description, but listen to what you're about to hear. It made me want to puke.
In the second visit that I had, it got personal. The President Putin had commissioned a beautiful portrait of President Trump from the leading Russian artist, and actually gave it to me and asked me to take it home to President Trump, which I brought home and delivered to him. It's been reported in the paper, but it was such a gracious moment, and told me a story, Tucker, about how when the president was shot, he went to his local church and met with his priest and prayed for the president, not because he was the president of he could become the president of the United States, but because he had a friendship with him and he was praying for his friend. It was, I mean, can you imagine sitting there and listening to these kind of conversations? And I came home and delivered that message to our president and delivered the painting, and he was clearly touched by it. So this is the kind of connection that we've been able to reestablish through, by the way, a simple word called communication.
This is how stepdads gain favor with their children, trying to win them over as the new dad. Hey, let me give you a little trinket, buddy. Hey, look, it's the painting. I got you the cool paint. I got you the new toy. Oh, you know, buddy, at the end of the day, you can always talk to me. You're my friend. You are a high-level diplomat trying to negotiate an end to the most violent war on the planet. The largest war in Europe since the end of World War II, started by the Russians, where they started it twice while lying about it. And now you're just going to take them at their word, and you're going to regurgitate this nonsense of them back scratching you. This is the stuff that you keep quiet, even if you do believe, because it would be embarrassing. It'd be embarrassing for you to tell the public how you're playing footsie with Putin under the table and how you're friends. Trump and Putin are close personal friends. And he was so concerned when his life was threatened because Trump, Putin's trying to gain favor with the Republican right to divide American society and gain one side in favor of Russia, one side against Russia. And so far, they've seemed to convince a decent amount of the American political elite. The American public are not largely on board, but the American political elite are. And it's having some impact on the Republican base. But the majority of Americans still view Russia as an enemy. I think only 4 or 5% of Americans have a positive view of Russia. So it hasn't worked on the vast majority of Americans, but it has worked in our political elite. And that's really all you need to accomplish. If you can divide it, if you can make it a political issue, if you can make it a partisan issue, then you can make it so maybe American presence on the world stage is cyclical every 4 to 8 years. And you could say that, Dylan, you know, that's speculative, the idea that this was Putin's intentions, even though he fought very hard to get Donald Trump elected with the Internet Research Agency when it was maintained by one of his main men, Prigozhin, which many people don't remember that, but it was Prigozhin who actually managed the disinformation campaign. It was the guy who led Wagner. Now, if you're putting warlords in charge of your campaign to try to divide American society so that they pump up Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter protests right next to each other so we can all fight each other in the streets, that doesn't sound very favorable to America's interests. But these are the people that our leaders thinks are our friends. Are our friends. Or at least their friends, maybe not ours.
Is a curd.
Beat Nizzle has donated $10. Well, fine, I'll put my painting of you away. No prayers.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Beat Nizzle. Thank you for the $10. I appreciate it. Either way, this is embarrassing. This is goofy. This is silly. This is stupid. But this is also dumb propaganda. And the fact that he thinks that saying this or like admitting this, that this, hey, look, it's a diplomatic achievement that Putin likes Donald Trump. That's not a diplomatic achievement. A diplomatic achievement would be getting a concession. How much have we conceded? Marines in Ukraine, no U.S. troop deployment, so we gave that up before negotiations started. Same with NATO membership. Same with territorial concessions. Same with Ukraine at the table. We changed the terms of what the ceasefire would be. Oh, we force Ukraine, after cutting off their aid, to do this 30-day ceasefire thing after we ignore their concerns about a ceasefire not working. And then we move it towards Russia. At what point do they reciprocate? That would be a diplomatic communication achievement. Them communicating their demands and us fulfilling them is not a victory of diplomacy. That's not an achievement. Like, oh, I really feel like we've de-escalated this crisis. What? By communicating with the robber and giving him your wallet? I mean, yeah, I guess you de-escalated because you lost, buddy. You didn't get it. You because you gave up the pot. My gosh, man, this is embarrassing. We're friends now. We're friends. And listen to how, and like, you might think that this type of framing or thinking doesn't affect the diplomatic specifics, but listen to him talk about the possibility of Putin invading Ukraine again. Listen to Witkoff talking about how Putin doesn't really want the rest of Ukraine, and he doesn't really want any more of Europe.
Would take stock markets down all over the world.
Well, they haven't been used in 80 years. They've been used exactly twice in human history.
You can't allow it to happen.
It's not a precedent you want at all.
And while I think we have to get a fair deal for Ukraine, we cannot allow that country to drag us into World War III. And that's not my policy. That's President Trump's policy.
Then what is, if I can just say,
clear,
like, what the hell?
How has Ukraine dragged us towards World War III? How is it not the Russians violating the agreements they signed and constantly threatening nuclear Armageddon, but not pulling the trigger on it because they understand what the consequences of that would be? How is it's Ukraine dragging us to the war, not the people who invaded? Is it because they defended themselves? Because they want fair terms? Since when, what precedent has been set historically about offensive wars and the use of atomic weapons to gain territory? This is not a historical precedent. Don't say like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy because, you know, before we would concede in an instance like this. We didn't fall back upon our atomic weapons in Vietnam. We talked about it in Korea, and that was a lot closer to an actual use of atomic weapons when the nuclear deterrent standard had not been built up to what it has been built up to now. It's something scary to spook the people with. It's one thing to have like a prudent, like, hey, the Ukrainians say that unless they take back Crimea, they're going to have to develop some dirty bomb. Then maybe you could like make up some scenario. But currently, we're giving up the whole pot and saying, Ukraine, why won't you give them, you've given up the cash in your wallet, but why won't you give them your credit card information too? How much do we expect them to concede before what we're doing is inviting invasions where the Russians say, hey, we'll nuke you if you don't give us what you want. And now we've set the standard.
Like, what the hell is going on with European? Like, Keir Starmer saying we're going to send British troops. Their entire military is smaller than the U.S. Marine Corps. The country is dying economically. All those countries are dying economically. Like, what are they thinking? What is that? Is that a posture? Is it a pose?
Well, I think it's a combination of a posture and a pose, and a combination of also being simplistic. I think there's this, this sort of notion of we've all got to be like Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
The Russians are going to march across Europe. I think that's preposterous, by the way. We have something called NATO that we did not have in World War II.
Do you think the Russians want to march across Europe?
100% not. I think
right. I mean, like, why would they want that? I wouldn't want those countries. Like, why would they?
First of all, why would they want to absorb Ukraine? For what purpose?
Exactly.
They don't need to absorb Ukraine. That would be like occupying Gaza. Why do the Israelis really want to occupy Gaza for the rest of their lives? They don't. They want stability there. They don't want to deal with that. But the Russians also have what they want. They've reclaimed these 5 regions. They have Crimea, and they've gotten what they want. So why do they need more?
Okay, so let's start with the diplomatic consequences of what this person is saying, and then let's get into the ridiculousness of what he said later. Okay, so let's start with the diplomatic consequences of, it's a posture to oppose British troops. Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth gave the idea out that, hey, Europe needs to take its own security seriously. Europe is not spending enough on defense. Why aren't they spending money on defense? Why aren't they being the ones paying the dividend for their defense? They need to be the ones to shoulder Ukraine's defense. And this was emphasized by an idea being proposed and talked about it being European peacekeepers. This is what was discussed by the Trump administration. At the start, there being European peacekeepers deployed in Ukraine instead of American. And that was supposed to be their soft landing. It was like, look, we're not going to have American troops in Ukraine. And I know that you probably don't like that, but at least the British can do something. Now, seemingly, we're only like a month and a half separated from these types of comments from the White House. And now we have, and they were saying this like at Munich, and they were like going to Europe to send this message that they need to be the ones to do this. And now all of a sudden, British troops in Ukraine? Crazy. No, whoa, that's crazy. Is that posture as a pose? They're dying. These nations are so pathetic. Do they really think they could face against Russia? Could they really do that? Is it posture as a pose? And he says it's posture and pose. So number one, do you or do you not want the Europeans to take their own security seriously? Do you or do you not want the Europeans to take their own security seriously? If you ask for them to shoulder that security burden, then they start to talk about it. And then you say, no, that's not serious. You can't do that. You can't, no. Then it really just sounds like you want the Europeans to not handle their own security, to not deal with their own security, and like allow you to have that lever. What do you want? Do you want them to deal with their own security or not? You want to know what I think it is? And this is my speculation. And I'll put out there that's my speculation. What I speculate is that Trump wanted to remove himself from the conflict. And one idea that's at least realistic is, well, if we don't have American peacekeepers, we can have European peacekeepers to stop the Russians from invading again. And so this is something they put forward at the start as like a nice conciliatory gambit in order to maybe get some peace from the Russians. But then the Russians said no peacekeepers, no nothing. Demilitarize Ukraine, no foreign troops on their soil. And now maybe they're walking back, because whether they want to publicly admit they're conceding again, they could be conceding any type of foreign troops in Ukraine, period. They could be conceding that. Now, whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know. But when you hear positions like this from Steve Witkoff being publicly espoused on podcasts, the Russians take the implication, oh, okay, so the Americans don't really want the Europeans in Ukraine. They just view it as posture imposed. It also is something that will reinforce their idea that the Europeans aren't that dedicated to it. It could also encourage them to, I think, go forward thinking, well, if Europe's not going to take Ukraine's security seriously, then this is just a waiting game. There's a million different problems attached to indicating that, hey, this nation that we say wants to be defended, these other nations being willing to do what we ask them, it's not serious. You're undercutting your own position. Hey, Jay Slick, thank you so much for the raid of 137 people. I appreciate that, buddy. Thank you, thank you. I haven't talked to him in a bit. Hope he's doing well. Hope he's doing well. We're just talking about the Russia-Ukraine peace negotiator going on Tucker Carlson's podcast and embarrassing himself. So that's the first position on this pose, and whether it's, you know, in this, him undercutting their own position. This other thing about Russia 100% not wanting to march across Europe. When I listen to them talk, these are children. These are children. Listen to how Tucker talks about the Russians. This is a children's understanding of geopolitics.
That we did not
We'll just listen to it one more time because it needs to sink in how silly this is.
have in World War II.
Do you think the Russians want to march across Europe?
100% not. I think.
Right. I mean, like, why would they want that? I wouldn't want those countries. Like, why would they?
First of
I wouldn't want those countries. Why would Russia want those countries? Oh, okay then. Because Tucker Carlson doesn't care about Estonia, then I guess the Russians don't care about Estonia. Well, hey, I don't think, you know, Tucker cares about Balochistan, so I guess Pakistan does it. Oh, do you care about Kandahar? Then why does India? You know, there's no logic to this. It's just Tucker doesn't care. He doesn't think Americans should care, and so he's treated the issue with no care. That's why he lied about it on Fox. That's why he lies about it on his podcast. And so he's just like, well, I wouldn't want these countries, so why would the rest? And that's it. And that's the polite suggestion. That's the nice suggestion. The nice suggestion is he just doesn't care, so he assumes the Russians doesn't care, and that's the amount of effort he puts in. The malicious suggestion is that after going to Russia so many times and doing this propaganda circuit, where Putin has directly told Tucker to his face, I believe Ukraine is like an extended part of Russia. And the reason why is because Prince Yaroslav's horse took a big dump in Kiev, and that connects us to the Novorossiya, and so now we are part of the Ruski Mir. So idi ко мне, Ukraine, idi ко мне. You know? So he says this publicly in front of everyone to Tucker. Can he really claim naivete? Can he? I don't really think so. So it's hard to really read whether it's maliciousness or just silliness or a combination of both. But then Witkoff follows this off. Witkoff follows this up. Now, mind you, Donald Trump said on the campaign trail, I know I'm silly. I actually listened to the things he said, and they were supposed to mean things I imagined at some point. He said on the campaign trail that Putin said to him in private. Now, this is Trump's claim, not mine. Okay, so believe Trump, don't believe Trump. Okay, this is Donald Trump's words. He said that Putin told him that Ukraine was the apple of his eye, that it was this jewel, this beautiful jewel that he just had to have. And he said this story not once, not twice, but I think thrice, or I think maybe even more times, because I saw him say it on, I think on a podcast on a few occasions, saw him say it during speeches. So he kept retelling the story, and it had the same beats. So I think this came from somewhere. I mean, it's not like Trump never lied, but assuming for a moment that it's true and that this man actually like maybe is supposed to represent Trump, so Trump's word's supposed to mean something. And, you know, Trump and Putin has said multiple times Ukraine can only exist as an extension of Russia, so it wouldn't match with the essays he's written. So considering that that's what Trump has said, that's what the essays Putin has said, why is Witkoff saying that there is no interest in Russia marching across and taking the rest of Ukraine? They don't have any interest in Odessa. They don't have any interest in Kharkiv. They don't have any interest in these. Yes, they do. They talk about it all the time. The human safari going on in Kherson. They want to conquer Kherson again. They want more land. They're demanding more land in negotiations. And they want Ukraine to be demilitarized, which would make it easy for them to invade again. This is the naivete, at best, that is negotiating a peace to this war. And if you want to, I know it might be confusing, like how can someone be this naive about the conflict? Well, it's because the person who's negotiating this, and I know expertise is boring. It sounds like, oh, expert, you want expertise in your governance? That's a big thing for you. That sounds kind of queer. I don't know about that. I want a fucking cowboy, you know, shoots from the hip type of guy. Whatever. This is Steve Witkoff, this is the guy negotiating the peace. This is the guy going over there talking to the Russians. Listen to him try to name the regions that he wants to sell over to Russia and that he's claiming, you know, has much more, you know, oh, he has Russian speakers, et cetera, et cetera. Listen to him trying to name these places.
Of all, I think the largest issue in that conflict are these so-called four regions: Donbass,
Yes.
Crimea, you know, the names
Lugansk, yeah.
Lugansk, and there's two others.
Dude, he didn't get one. No, he got one. He got Crimea, duh. But Donbass isn't a region. Donbass is an area which composes two regions. So that's not a region. That doesn't count, which means he was 1 for 5. 1 for 5. Tucker Carlson, the person who regularly lies about the war, has to jump in to throw out Luhansk. Lugansk. He even used the Russian spelling for Luhansk? Of course he did. Of course he did. What did you expect? He doesn't know. He doesn't know these regions. But and the Russians are coming to him demanding regions, demanding land, demanding here. So now, mind you, none of these regions except for Crimea are completely controlled by the Russians. Even Luhansk, but there's a tiny sliver left. So if they're demanding these regions, and I warned about this a while ago, how long is it going to be until we have one of these people suggesting just give them Kherson, just give them the place where they're hunting civilians? Because if you don't even know the name of the place, are you going to fight for it in negotiations?
They're Russian speaking.
Yep.
There have been referendums where the overwhelming majority of the people have indicated that they want to be under Russian rule.
Yes.
I think
this is now RT. We have a Russia Today presenter negotiating on behalf of the United States. Number one, speaking Russian doesn't make you Russian. Anastasia, guest of the show, she's a Russian speaker. Doesn't want to be part of Russia. I don't speak American. I speak English. Do I want to be British? No. Do the Irish want to be British when they speak it? No. They don't want to be these things. Just because people speak Russian doesn't mean they want to be part of Russia. My main fixer, Russian speaker. Doesn't want to be part of Russia. He was displaced from Donetsk with his family. The language in and of itself means nothing. It's the people that matters. That's the first thing. Second thing. He's talking about the Russian rubber stamp referendums. He's talking about when the Russians went door to door with soldiers carrying rifles, knocked on people's homes, and it was like, hey, we need you to vote. And you need to vote to be part of Russia or on your own. You can't vote to be part of Ukraine. Sorry. Oopsie doopsie. And it was rigged. It was a rigged vote. It was a rigged rubber stamp referendum where soldiers went door to door, and the vast majority of the people who, he said, oh, the vast majority of the people who live there, the majority of people who live there, that's not true. The majority of the people who live there did not vote because they're either displaced or they just didn't. And again, imagine a poll watcher comes to your house, they want you to vote a certain way, and they have guns, okay? How are you voting? Especially since the election system can be used as demographic control. You can use it to register who lives where, who they are. You don't think the Russians would be willing to track if you voted to leave and stay in Ukraine or not? When they took over Crimea, Crimean activists ended up bloated, floating down the river. We've had tons of Ukrainian civil society participants be arrested in occupied territory. And these are the referendums that Steve Witkoff is saying gives legitimacy to Russia's hold to the land. He's saying that he's even suggesting the majority of people who live there actually want to be part of Russia. And they speak Russian. They're basically Russians. And Tucker Carlson, of course, backs it up because he's done propaganda for the Russians before. So doing propaganda for the Russians again is, of course, no difficulty for him. This is our negotiator. This is the person that the lives of hundreds of thousands to millions rest upon when they say about ending the war in this golden age Trump talks about. Only 27% of Americans believe Trump is going to bring about an end to the war through these negotiation efforts. I wonder why. Maybe because these are the people he's entrusted it with. This is how you turn our allies against us, and this is how you put somebody up there who's going to make terms that are going to be unacceptable to the Ukrainians, non-starters, demilitarization, the giving up of land that he doesn't understand the significance of.
That's the key issue in the conflict. So that's the first thing. That when that gets settled, and we're having very, very positive conversation.
And Russia controls that. In fact, some of those territories are now, from the Russian perspective, part of Russia.
Correct. That's correct.
All of those territories from the Russian. He doesn't know. They don't know. They don't know any of it. They've already announced the annexation of all those territories. But Kherson and Zaporizhia, these are the main cities. The capital, like the capital of Kherson, is not controlled by the Russians. So what do you do? What do you do? They don't know. They don't know who controls what. They don't know the name of the region. They're talking about this as if they read like the Wikipedia section like 30 minutes before going live.
This has always been the issue,
right?
And it's sort of no one wants to talk about it. That's the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is there are constitutional issues within Ukraine as to what they can concede to with regard to giving up territory. The Russians are.
That's true. This is the first actual fact he said. There are issues where, for example, they say, hey, Ukraine, give it up. Zelensky can't just say yes. The Rada, the Ukrainian legislators who are voted on by the people, get a vote, which makes sense because they're a democracy despite what Trump says.
De facto in control.
Flawed one, but aren't we all?
Of these territories.
Yes.
The question is, will they be? Will the world acknowledge that those are Russian territories?
Sorry, let's go back.
Territory or de facto in control of these territories?
Yes.
That's, again, he doesn't know what they're in control of. He's just shooting from the hip.
The question is, will they be? Will the world acknowledge that those are Russian territories? Will it end up? Can Zelensky survive politically if he acknowledges this?
Doesn't have enough time to figure out what the regions are. Enough time to speculate on Zelensky's political survival post-war. Let's go to one more, okay? Again, this is who Trump trusts with the future. I just want to show you this interview because if you think it's only like this on Tucker Carlson, here is him on Fox News, which is supposed to be the mainstream right-wing news channel. This is supposed to be, I know it obviously has not always held up the highest standards of journalistic ethics, but it's supposed to be mainstream right-wing news. Here is him talking about these territories he could not name before.
You seem
again doubling down on this idea that Putin is not that big of a threat to Europe.
That he doesn't want to expand the territory beyond what he's taken now. I know there's going to be a conversation about how much of that Ukraine does or doesn't.
By the way, if that's true, that they don't want to take more than what they've taken now, then why is he still fighting? Why is he still marching forward? There was a 30-day across-the-board ceasefire accepted, and instead, the Russians accepted an energy ceasefire when Trump said he was going to accept more, so Trump lied, or the Russians undercut him, and then they didn't want to admit that they were undercut because they were embarrassed. Whatever. Energy ceasefire. That's violated anyway. But if he doesn't want to take any more territory, why not have an across-the-board frontline ceasefire and just negotiate the territory that they control now away? Why continue to advance? Why continue to waste lives and resources and money when Russia's economy is in the position it is, if not because they want to get as much as possible?
get back. But you're convinced that he's not going to go further or have aspirations towards Europe. Obviously, they're concerned about that being much closer to this geographically. But 2014, we had Crimea. That hasn't come back. Why? And he's, gone far beyond that in this most recent attack on Ukraine. So why are you convinced that he won't press further if he's given some reward or some territory this time around?
Well, look, he's been at war for several years. It's in large part been about those 5 regions, and it's in his speeches. There's a view within the country of Russia that these are Russian territories, that there are referendums within these territories that justify these actions.
See how he's changed? Oh, the view in Russia. That's not how it was said on Tucker Carlson's show. And when Tucker Carlson affirmed that was true, he didn't say anything. Jelly spine coward. That's the same spine you're going to see negotiating.
This is not me taking sides. I'm just identifying what the issues are. I've never seen a conflict that can be resolved without level setting the facts, and we're level setting the facts. Now, I've been asked my opinion. So about what President Putin's motives are on a larger scale. And I simply have said that I just don't see that he wants to take all of Europe. This is a much different situation than it was in World War II. In World War II, there was no NATO. I mean, the same NATO that you guys constantly degrade the deterrence of? You have countries that are armed there.
The same NATO that Putin clearly stated at the start of the invasion or before the invasion negotiations that he wanted the atomic arsenal, the atomic umbrella to be removed from those bordering Russia.
To me, it just does. I take him at his word in this sense. So, and I think the Europeans
take him at his word.
Beginning to come to that.
Okay, so we can't take him at his word when he says Ukraine is an essential extension of Russia and it must be part of Russia or not exist at all. But we can take him at his word when he says, yeah, this will be it. This one will be it.
Belief too, but it sort of doesn't matter. That's an academic issue. The real issue here, the agenda set forth by President Trump, he is my boss, and I adhere to that fact. The agenda is stop the killing, stop the carnage. Let's end this thing.
If that's your only objective, and your enemy in negotiations, quote unquote, negotiating opponent knows that, they're going to use that against you to get everything out of you they can. If they know that you won't walk away from the table, then they're gonna go away with the whole pot, man.
Can't end things without communicating with both sides, understanding what each of them need, and then trying to bring them together. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah,
and the killing, don't kick it down the road so our children have to deal with it. Fox News have a somewhat decent question. I mean, they didn't imply the follow-up pressure that they should have. But I mean, like, it was not a sycophantic question. That is true.